How can our dynasty alter its whole procedure and system of etiquette established for more than a century in order to meet your individual views? Again, very reasonable. So, McCartney, he was a British envoy. He went to China and he kind of forced his way in by the implication.
Because of the implication.
It wasn't a threat per se, but he shows up with gunboats, right? And he's like, I want to meet with the emperor. And this is something that in China at the time, they were very, very much against commoners coming in and speaking. The idea that an emissary would be able to come in and demand an audience with the king, like, this is the Middle Kingdom, and that's a reference to them being the middle of the world, right? They would not in general allow this, but in this certain case they allowed this, and it largely has to do with probably increasing European power, and they were trying to nip this in the bud. And this is a representative of the British Empire. This was before their absolute peak, but getting there. They were very, very powerful, and at this point there are actually European traders with a D, that are in China, but they are under very specific rules. They're not allowed to go anywhere else. And when these traders go to China, they stay in this city. They live under Chinese dress, haircuts, and they don't leave for the rest of their life. They live there. They live in this place. It's very, very insular. This is the following response given by the Chinese emperor, Qianlong. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, to King George III of Great Britain, following the British envoy to China. This is the time of mercantilism. The British are concerned because Chinese goods had been considered, and this isn't talked about a lot, even in New England in like the 1600s, you can find Chinese goods and Chinese replica goods in New England in rich households because they were seen as prestige goods, right? Like they're paying out of their ass for silk and for China, literally China, the name of the bowls that we have in English. It's just called China. This is considered the pinnacle of goods. So the Chinese, they want to send their goods, or they sell their goods, and it goes along the Silk Road, and it goes along on boats, and it's sold, and tea as well. A lot of tea. Tea became very popular. And all of these goods are being sold in Great Britain, and it's bankrupting the British because all of their people's money and gold and silver, it's all going to China. That's an exaggeration, but this was both the perception and in a lot of ways the reality. This had been true for a very long time. You, O king, live beyond the confines of many seas, nevertheless, impelled by your humble desire. See here, there's a lot of like veiled insults here, right? They're already like, yeah, we're the best. You want to come here and get a piece of this because we are the best. And they're not wrong, right? Like they're pretty correct in what they're saying there. And that is the general perception of China. You have dispatched a mission respectfully bearing your remote memorial. There's also not only like veiled insults, but there's also respect given, right? The emperor recognizes the king as a very powerful man, just not at his level. He's number one. Right? Up until this point, though, and this is why this happens, because at this point, it starts to become like, they're pretty powerful. And I think the Chinese are aware of that, which is why they gave him an audience in the first place, even though it was seen as quite disrespectful based on how they viewed it. Your envoy has crossed the seas and paid his respects at my court on the anniversary of my birthday. So they're framing this as a almost tribute mission, right? Pay your respects. As in the British did come and they gave gifts. To show your devotion, you have also sent offerings of your country's produce. So this is key here, right? Because he's saying like they came with gifts for the king, which is very normal, but they're then framing the gifts they gave to the king not as it being like, hey, look how great our civilization is. They're framing it as tribute, right? It's like it is a tribute system that the Chinese had enacted. They had these lesser. It's feudal in a way, right? It's like it's done in an East Asian way. They're saying you have sent offerings to show your devotion. You have also sent offerings of your country's produce. They're establishing that the British are kind of a member of this tribute state. I have perused your memorial. The earnest terms in which it is couched reveal a respectful humility on your part. So again, I mean, they're complimenting. They're saying like, yes, you're respectful and humble. Again, it's they're kind of little broing the British a little bit here. They're saying like, you're being humble because you're below us, right? Which is highly praiseworthy. And again, it's the insults and the little broing mixed in with actual, actual respect, which is huge for a Confucian country. This is absolutely huge. In consideration of the fact that your ambassador and his deputy have come a long way with your memorial and tribute, I forgot that they actually said the word tribute, right? They're explicitly saying here that you're a member of this tributary system. I have shown them high favor and have allowed them to be introduced into my presence. And they're basically saying like, yeah, we did you a favor by letting you in. And honestly, based on the precedent here, based on like how they really don't do this. This was not a thing that happened very often. We're doing you a favor here, but really there's an implication here that they were allowed in for this very against Chinese custom type of thing because of the power that they were gaining and were recognized to have. So I have shown them high favor and have allowed them to be introduced into my presence. And this is true. It is still a little bit of little broing, but it is true that this is not something that they would generally do. To manifest my indulgence, I have entertained them at a banquet and made them numerous gifts. I have also caused presents to be forwarded to the naval commander and 600 of his officers and men, although they did not come to pay king. This is where they were at. So that they too may share in my all-embracing kindness. I am the magnanimous emperor of China, and I'm being so nice. And to be honest, if you look into what those gifts were, they were very generous. They were very big gifts. Like, they were giving huge amounts of stuff to not only the King George, who they sent stuff back to him, but everybody, all the men and the officers, all the enlisted men as well. And, as a former enlisted man myself, I appreciate that quite a bit. And I'm not saying that facetiously. I really mean that. I do appreciate that. As to your entreaty to send one of your nationals to be accredited to my celestial court, celestial. This is very much mandate of heaven. This is almost God emperor status, right? I don't think he was thought to be a god even in China, but he was thought to be maybe like attached to God. He has godliness in him in a more animistic way. And as to your entreaty to send one of your nationals to be accredited to my celestial court and to be in control of your country's trade with China, this request is contrary to all usage of my dynasty and cannot possibly be entertained. So they're saying no here. They're saying no here in a very nice way. And this is a very reasonable no, because to entertain the request of, if you just joined us, I was talking earlier about how the European traders who were trading in China at the time they were under strict rules, living by Chinese custom. This is all to protect Chinese culture. This is a very insular society. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. He talks about it here. It is true that Europeans in the service of the dynasty have been permitted to live at Peking, but they are compelled to adopt Chinese dress. They are strictly confined to their own precincts. So there are areas in the city where these European traders are allowed to live in, but they're under very strict, almost draconian from a European perspective, but very normal from Chinese perspective. Confined to their own precincts and are never permitted to return home. They can't go back. Once you do this, you are not allowed to go back to wherever you came from. So a Dutch trader, he's there forever. You are presumably familiar with our dynastic regulations, which I assume they were. They must have known this. This had been going on for a long time. This was like the 1600s is when the Dutch were the most powerful. They would have been still quite powerful in the East. Your proposed envoy to my court could not be placed in a position similar to that of European officials in Peking who are forbidden to leave China, nor could he, on the other hand, be allowed liberty of movement and the privilege of corresponding with his own country, so that you would gain nothing by his residence in our midst. So this was to protect Chinese secrets, right? They're not even allowed to talk. I forgot about this part. They're not allowed to talk to people back in England. They're essentially white Chinese people now. I don't know if they were allowed to marry Chinese women or anything. Moreover, our celestial dynasty possesses vast territories, and tribute missions for the dependencies are provided for by the Department for Tributary States. So this is talking about that tributary system that I was mentioning earlier. And they're talking about that. They're talking about, like, they really can't listen to this request. They can't actually adhere to this request without completely changing the way they do their own country. And they're not going to let some dirty barbarians, which is how they would view pretty much everyone else. Maybe not that extreme, but pretty much they would view anything outside of the Chinese state. It would be impossible to leave them to their own desires. Supposing that your envoy should come to our court, his language and national dress differ from that of our people, and there would be no place in which to bestow him. So they're saying, like, you can't come here and just be British. You gotta, like, pretend to be a big-eyed, like, paler Chinese person. Maybe not paler, but different skin tone. You gotta at least wear the stuff. You gotta wear the Chinese stuff to get in here. And that's the way they run their country. You can feel however you want about it. That's the way they want to run their country. Okay? No place in which to bestow him. It may be suggested that he might imitate the Europeans permanently resident in Peking and adopt the dress and customs of China. But it has never been our dynasty's wish to force people to do things unseemly and inconvenient. So they're making an offer here, right? They're saying, like, yeah, your envoy can come in and he can have the privileges that we give to other European traders that are allowed to come in, dress Chinese, never leave, live by our rules. But they're also saying here, like, we don't want to force them to do that. Like, people do that by choice. And that's true. They weren't forcing these Europeans to do that. The Europeans that did that were on their own choice, or at least the choice of their lords, the kings and the emperors of France and Spain and the Netherlands that would ask them to do that, which is, it's a big ask. I would never want to do that. Besides, supposing I sent an ambassador to reside in your country, how could you possibly make for him the requisite arrangements? Europe consists of many other nations besides your own. If each and all demanded to be represented at our court, how could we possibly consent? And being very, very normal here, right? They're being very reasonable, and I'm saying that, like, I truly believe they are being reasonable, because they're saying, like, look, if we allowed you to break the rules that we've had in place, everybody's going to want to break the rules. You bring the snack into class, everybody wants a snack. You can't do it. You got to stop it. The thing is utterly impracticable. Impracticable. The heck? I've never seen that word before in my life. I'm going to assume that just means impractical. You know what? I'm too interested. I'm going to Google this word. Impracticable. Impossible in practice to do or carry out. Cool word. Hard to say. How could our dynasty alter its whole procedure and system of etiquette established for more than a century in order to meet your individual views? Again, very reasonable. If it be said that your object is to exercise control over your country's trade, your nationals have had full liberty to trade at Canton for many a year. Canton, I feel like they changed the name of... Oh, yeah. Now Canton is called Guangzhou. Guangzhou is down by Hong Kong, right? This is very southern China. This is China today, but Canton, the language Cantonese, it's mostly spoken in Hong Kong and this area of China. This is one of the major trade cities even today in China. But this is far, far away from up here in Beijing. This is Peking up here. This is like thousands of miles away from Beijing. How can if it is to be said and have the ability to trade at Canton for many a year and have received the greatest consideration at our hands? Missions have been sent by Portugal and Italy, preferring similar requests. The throne appreciated their sincerity and loaded them with favors, besides authorizing measures to facilitate their trade besides, as in they didn't authorize measures to facilitate their trade with China. You got to go to Peking, where they put the white people. You are no doubt aware that when my Canton merchant, Wu Chaoping, was in debt to the foreign ships, I made the viceroy advance the monies due out of the provincial treasury and ordered him to punish the culprit severely. Why then should foreign nations advance this utterly unreasonable request to be represented at my court? Peking is nearly 2,000 miles from Canton, and at such a distance, what possible control could any British representative exercise? Again, being very, they don't really have to, but they're being very understanding and just explaining their reasoning. This is right before the Opium Wars, where the British are deciding they can just sell drugs in there whenever. If you assert that your reverence for our celestial dynasty fills you with a desire to acquire our civilization, our ceremonies and code of laws differ so completely from your own that even if your envoy were able to acquire the rudiments of our civilization, so they're framing here that they want to get stuff. They want to learn civilization from the Chinese. I know they got their own version over there in that backwater island, England, but we got the real civilization. So how are you going to do that if you just get our stuff? The rudiments of our civilization, you could not possibly transplant our manners and customs to your alien soil. Therefore, however adept the envoy might become, nothing would be gained thereby. So this is a very different understanding, right? So the Chinese are not as concerned with the material goods. They are concerned with them, but it's much less on their hierarchy as the ideas of civilization, of perpetuating their culture, of like their harmony, of this Lao Tzu type of idea. They want peace and harmony, and they don't care as much about material goods as they do these other things. Whereas the Europeans, especially at this point, but even today with consumerism and everything, Europeans are obsessed with material goods. And when I say Europeans, I'm including Canada, Australia, the United States. I'm talking about European diaspora countries like that. Okay. Swaying the wide world, I have but one aim in view, namely to maintain a perfect governance and to fulfill the duties of the state. Strange and costly objects do not interest me. Okay, so he said exactly what I said, but he said it way better in not in prose, but in this flourishing, beautiful language that they have. This is why I love primary source documents as well. So they're saying we don't care about this stuff. We care about maintaining a perfect governance, and that's about the harmony and everything like that. If I have commanded that the tribute offerings, they say it again, that you're offering tribute as a lesser little bro to us. You're the little bro, we're the big bro, we're the Chinese, no one's as cool as us. And they are sort of right in that in a lot of ways. O king, are to be accepted. This was solely in consideration for the spirit which prompted you to dispatch them from afar. Our dynasty's majestic virtue has penetrated onto every country under heaven. Under heaven, the mandate of which is given to these people themselves. Like, they have the mandate of heaven. That's the implicit idea here, that they are the ones that rule under heaven. Please like the video, I would appreciate that. And kings of all nations have offered their costly tribute by land and sea. As your ambassador can see for himself, we possess all things. I set no value on objects strange or ingenious. They say they don't need your trade. They got all the stuff. And there's also an element of, like, they know that these types of objects, these types of new technologies, which for a long time, even in Europe, were viewed as being disruptive to their own nation. New technologies would be seen as a threat to power. And this is what happens, right? Like, new technologies and trading allows the merchant class to grow in power above the monarchies, and it allows for things like the French Revolution. So this isn't an empty thing that they're afraid of. The Chinese Empire, prior to communism, prior really to the 1800s when the Opium Wars happened, they were very, very good at this. Is my answer to your request to appoint a representative at my court, a request contrary to our dynastic usage, which would only result in inconvenience to yourself. I have expounded my wishes in detail and have commanded your tribute envoys to leave in peace on their homeward journey. It behooves you, O king, to respect my sentiments and to display even greater devotion and loyalty in the future. And look, I know King George goes by King George. He didn't go by emperor, right? Even though in a lot of ways he kind of was an emperor at this point, having vast territories far off from the United Kingdom, especially a little bit later. This is kind of before India is all British. But yeah, a king is lower ranked than an emperor, you know, on the hierarchy of honorifics. A king is below an emperor. Valuable presents in excess of the number usually bestowed on such occasions, including silks and curiosa list of which is likewise enclosed. Do you reverently receive them and take note of my tender goodwill towards you? The Chinese have such a long time scale. I talk about this quite a lot. You probably heard me mention it before. Europeans and European-derived countries, they have this almost like we think about it, our culture thinks about it largely in terms of quarterly profits, like 3 months at a time. A lot of our culture is based in corporations, and that's how they look at it. People don't think about things on a long time scale, which I think that's very, very obvious in the types of issues that we have in our country today. People aren't looking 100 years down the line on what demographic replacement and all these other things that were much more controversial to talk about 10 years ago, but now have really come into the, I probably wouldn't have even said that 10 years ago, demographic replacement. But now it's so obvious that demographic replacement is a thing. They think on a long time scale, generations, not individuals. And they're much less individualistic than the West. The West is uniquely individualistic.